Today I'm joined, happy to meet Ayo, and we will talk about topic, theme. But first, probably I'd like to introduce yourself a little bit to me and to us.
Sure. I'm Ayo. I'm a route setter, Canadian by passport. I say that sometimes, but I live right now in Salt Lake City in the U.S.
And how come you moved to Salt Lake City?
I was doing some work with the Bouldering projects. That's actually how I got to the U.S. I was for a while the head setter in Minneapolis, Bouldering project there for a couple of years, and then there was the potential to work on some sort of new conceptual projects in Salt Lake. So I moved here, uh, and basically as soon as I got here, COVID exploded and erased a few of those projects. The projects got canceled. So I was here and able to, find a little bit of new work and then some new inspiration. I had a lot of time to figure out a couple of things. So I worked on an online course that will start very soon for route setting, and then I'm doing a little bit of work every once in a while with USAC, USA Climbing, and the training center that's here.
Cool, and there we are. You have a commercial background, or like not a commercial background. So you used to set in commercial gyms a lot, and now you're doing a lot of detailed training or comp style setting in a training facility, right?
Yeah, I worked in Toronto at Joe Rockhead's climbing gym for just over 10 years, running a really small crew there that was really great. And then also in Minneapolis, the gym is quite a bit larger commercial facility. But I've had a lot of competition experience setting on the setting side, and then I competed for a while on the Canadian national team. And so now a lot of the work I'm doing is with competitive climbers and training environments for competitive climbers.
I think I've seen you around in Germany. I think you were in Cologne one time before we opened Stuntwork. I think we met you at a bouldering session at Boulder Planet, it's called. So
Yes.
you were on the circuit. Is it called circuit nowadays? You were bouldering World Cups as well, right? How long did you do that?
My first was 2012, and the last was Pachioji. It was 2017. So a little while. I think I did about between 1 and 3 bouldering cups a year through that period, and it was like the most fun. It was
Looking
quite enjoyable.
Self-funded, right?
Sorry? Oh yeah. Yeah, we were entirely self-funded. So basically what I would do every year is see which World Cups I could or wanted to do, and then space them out in terms of how I could work and make money in between enough to go to the next one. So Munich was always great because there was a big space between the other competitions and the last one of the year. So I had some time to make a bunch of money working and then travel to go to the competition. It was also like a great competition, but probably one of the best, I think, of the year.
It always used to be a really good highlight with the sun fading and big audience and phenomenal like World Cups and World Champs, and I really liked it. Yeah, I think why we met here today, or why we messaged a lot on Instagram, was whether we can talk about the topic commercial setting versus versus com style setting. Is there, because nowadays you run into a lot of discussions on social media. I know it's a curse. Okay, even on commercial sets, a lot of people, when I met newer setters, I don't know, they always say, should I set something like Comstar? What are you talking about? Like, I'm not taping anything. I'm not a judge. And we don't have athletes. We have customers.
Right.
Um, how do we start this? Do you think there is a difference between comp style boulders and commercial boulders?
Right. I mean, personally, no, I don't think there's is a difference. Not necessarily. I think we can take uh, the boulders in either context in any direction, and all of the directions work really well. Uh, I think a lot of people when they're talking about, especially in the United States, when they're talking about comp style setting, they're talking about a few specific things. One is the use of volumes. Another is momentum. I think that's quite popular, uh, and I think maybe those cloud what's happening a little bit. A little bit. You know, if you talk about a gym like the Bouldering projects that iconically sort of uses a lot of volumes in the setting, people very often want to call that a comp style or comp e setting. But from my experiences competing, I don't think the analogies stand very strong. They aren't they don't really work. Not they're not so descriptive anyways. So personally, I don't really think there's a difference, but I kind of understand what people are sort of getting at.
I think you kind of described it as well, or like you didn't describe it, but you gave hints about it. Volumes and momentum, they became quite popular through competitions. That's kind of a thing. Like I think the first time I saw like real plywood volume was maybe 2009, 2010. Like really, actually, like wrapping my head around it. Like yeah, and because there were sponsored, like whole companies sent out their stuff to competitions just to get more media attention, and they were due to those volumes and big fiberglass stuff, more and more athletic, momentum-based movements became popular. People integrated the stuff into the gyms, and that's probably my take. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that probably describes how I might, sort of either remember it or interpret what was happening a lot. And I think that's true. Is that historically we represented the idea of climbing in gyms as having a one-way direction from outdoors to indoors in terms of influence. And then that was, I think, as competitions became more popular, uh, the influence was very powerfully also going in the opposite direction. And I think that's kind of what's started to happen. I think people still aren't describing it in ways that, for me, make a lot of sense. Um, but I think that's what's happening is that we're really understanding that the influence of the competition climbing culture and materials are entering the gym, and I think that uh, is coming in a lot of places in conflict um, with the values, the like old values uh, of what we thought a gym should be and what we thought it should be like. Um,
Did you have resistance, for example, in Minneapolis from
yeah,
like
yeah,
used to climbers who've never seen before?
yeah. I think that Minneapolis is a cool place because there was a really strong culture of climbing, and it really did represent itself um, as being tied to the outdoors. The indoors existed, I think, largely in that culture only to facilitate climbing outside. And so the values that didn't look like they plugged right in were met with some really great resistance by a lot of the people who I think called themselves climbers. I think in the bouldering projects, really in climbing in general, I think what's happening is the people that called themselves climbers move into the new gyms, but they also meet people who are learning climbing. They don't care what climbing should be. or if they know. And so it is a really interesting mix, and it's an interesting question of like combining these things or educating people about what's happening. In a lot of gyms, I think it's quite possible to to jump right over the climbers. You know, there are so many people in the gyms that either uh, don't know what this like potential conflict is, or they don't care. And and I think that that I think represents a lot of what happens on the internet is that climbers want a lot of people that used to call themselves climbers are holding on to something, but other people are that are entering the sport, they don't mind not holding it. They're ready to explore, I think, a bit more, and that's kind of cool.
Did you have the same experience? Oh, I had that in Germany because we have different region. Every different region has a different kind of outdoor climbing. In northern Germany, it's limestone. It's quite powerful, but bouldering section. While in western Germany, it's sandstone. Well, like it's not sandstone, but they are living close to flows, so it's a lot of tension, body tension, and eastern Germany, a different kind of sandstone. Lower part of Germany, again, limestone and different kind of powerful climbing. Here are also powerful. And I felt the regional gyms, which used to cater to the outdoor climbers, also had different styles of setting. Like when it came to the indoor and different indoor setting styles, and you still see it from time to time. Did you have the same experience? Because I don't know what it looks like over there.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting thing that it, for sure, I think happened a lot in the gyms, uh, and is one of the things I really like to pay attention to is that I'm not usually trying to represent the climbing in just a particular area. Some of the idea around variety that I want to present uh, has to do with climbing around the world in different contexts, and that was another really cool one. Is that yeah? Now that I'm in Salt Lake, the climbing is very different in gyms than it was, you know, in Minneapolis, but also than it was in Toronto. And I think you're right that that has to do a lot with the translation of a couple of things. Uh, One is the local climbing, but also where the climbers are going. Toronto is a really good example. A lot of the climbers who are sport climbers in Toronto spend a lot of time in Kentucky,
Mm-hmm.
and so the climbing that we used to make in Toronto, and I think even the way the gyms were made were to reproduce something that represented climbing that was like Kentucky or held some of the same values about like endurance, movement styles, even hold styles, really, that were acceptable or popular or, you know, represented a big part of the distribution of the total climbing that we were making. Yeah, it is. It's a very cool thing, and I think that you know, one of the things that, in my experience as a competitive climber, is that as we travel into more places for competitions or for just climbing or for vacations, is that it is possible to experience a lot of different climbing, and to represent that in our setting, in my setting, is really cool. It's fun. For me personally, it provides a really nice kind of challenge, but also I think, and one of the ideas that was presented to me, I think, really early in my experience setting is that the one of the goals of the setters in a particular area in a gym is to make the membership better, and you know, and I think one of the ways to do that is to expose them to lots of different climbing, different scenarios.
You mentioned the word educate. Do you I always say I take them on a journey. If they take something, and if customers take something on board,
Yeah.
enjoy it, and learn something, I love it. If if they break the boulder, if they find another way, and they're happy with it, cool for you.
Yeah.
But I think I, at some point, I went away from the word educate
Right.
because. What would you say about it?
Yeah, I I think I come from a similar vein of like what's happening while people are climbing. I think like it's true that when root setters talk about educate, very often we talk about teaching some movement or something through. I've in my experience, that's not really what's happening. If people aren't there specifically to learn in a very specific context, they don't necessarily have to learn anything.
Mm.
And so it's true that when I talk about education, usually it's about conversation. It is a particular context. Um, and that's what I meant in in that description is that um, yeah, I think that root setters hold a lot of information in the gym context, and they can be a great resource for education in those kinds of efforts. Uh, but I don't think there are not many contexts unless uh, where I can like teach something to someone or expect someone to learn something without direct contact to them. That idea is very very hard for me. So yeah, I think it's true. What sometimes I try to make climbing where people have a similar type of experience, but that's as close as I think I would leave it in terms of education.
But looking at the other part of our jobs, or at your job at the moment, from time to time setting comp simulations, would you consider that education?
I mean, I think it has really similar opportunities for miscommunication. Um,
Mm.
you know, I think that one of the things that I'm really interested in is what is the ideal sort of training environment that will allow people to take things from it in a way that helps both of us, because a lot of the training scenarios that I am in or go to or have worked through in the past, we just sort of run a comp simulation and then have a debrief. Um, and I don't think that those. I think that there might be other ways to move through those simulations and those training opportunities where the competitors get more out of it and the
Mm.
root setters get more out of it. That's one of the frames of the course that I'm doing now because I have root setters and athletes in it. What they're working on is the idea of like how can we continue to make each other better. And I think feedback is sort of it's too loose a term. Like was it that boulder was awesome doesn't really help, or that
Yeah.
boulder sucked. Doesn't help anyone with uh, any kind of development. So I think you're right. There is a difference between sort of offering something and how the climbers uptake that information or interpret the information. I think interpretation is a really interesting and probably important idea in climbing for me. Is because that's the form that we're ultimately giving the climbers in a competition. We're not talking to them through it.
Yeah.
It's their work to interpret what's happening and to express something, in a few of the terms that I'm using sort of recently. Um, and so so that's what I think where I like to work in these settings is how are the climbers interpreting what we're doing, and then can we develop either language in the term that while we're working together in the training context that will help them interpret the climbing when I'm not there, or when the coaches are not there, and what are those differences a little bit?
It's getting pretty philosophical. I love it. Two things about the debrief and the feedback. What you mentioned, good bowler, bad bowler. What I always try to do is like use good or bad. I want to hear more. Is it because the crimp was too painful? That's something I can work with. It's not the thing I work with painful itself, but maybe awkward or uncomfortable position would work well. So I think that's just a piece of advice for people out there to get like better feedback, in my opinion.
Right.
Go always in, but maybe going a little bit more practical. When you talk about the debrief, when we did, for example, with a German team, comp simulations, and when we had the time, and unfortunately, a lot of competitors already zoned out because after the round, that's what I think has the most potential. Like we should run the round on Friday and Saturday, and then do a real debrief day on Sunday, and go with the competitors to the boulders again, and talk them through and show them through to all our tweaks and the path we found to set this boulder and why we decided. Yeah, why did we make the decision to keep the boulder in that state of on the wall?
Yeah, I think that those are really interesting things too, for sure. Just the little dude, he just ran in. Yeah, with his favorite toy. Um, no, I think you're right. Is that two things for me are really interesting in that. One is that as soon as they get off the boulders, I think is traditionally in a competition when I, as the route setter, hear about the kind of feedback that is, it's like that was great or that was terrible. I mean, really, most people don't want to tell me immediately that it's terrible. Usually, say, oh, that was, they love it. This was great, and that you're right. It's not so helpful. It doesn't help me change. So yeah, I like to think of the ideally I will work with athletes over a period of time that that really lets me hear them in different states. I want to know what they felt like immediately after, and try to interpret that with as much emotion as possible, because that's something I think usually they have a large attachment to what happened emotionally. And then the next day, I think you're right. They have a slightly different view of how they see. They're a little bit better distance. And then what I'm really interested also lately in is over time, how does that change in a month? Can they still interpret what happened in a way that's useful for me and for them? And then does that change over a period of 3 or 4 months? My ideal scenario for working in a training environment with athletes is to continually see how they interpret what's going on and how I produce new climbing so that they can apply it again. So yeah, I mean, that's, I think maybe not a lot of people have the opportunity on the routesetting end to do that, but I think that's maybe a connection between commercial setting, sampling and watching people and hearing how they do it, and then figuring out how we're supposed to make them better. In one term, in some frames, the question is not how we make them better, but how do we make them enjoy the climbing, more. That's a very sort of a fairly commercial um, theme that a lot of people are working with. And I think that, whatever that is, those are part of how we have to explore those ideas.
But in general, comparing commercial setting and comp setting, you would agree that we have different motivations behind it.
Oh yeah.
Maybe we can point out some differences between
it. I mean, yeah. I mean, in a competition, one of the you described the idea that the crimp is uncomfortable or the crimp hurts. In a competition, that can tell me a lot about motivation. And I think that that's not something that we usually try to do in a commercial context. We're not trying to find out. We're not trying to move boulders into a place or a round of boulders, maybe more appropriately, to find out who wants to win or who wants to top the boulders the most. But that's a frame that we can use in the competition context. So there are, I think, quite a few differences that we can use that way that don't show up very often, and maybe shouldn't show up too often in the commercial context. Another thing that happens is that the athletes in a competition context are very, very good at falling, for example. So I can make insecure climbing very difficult in a lot of different scenarios on the wall at wherever I want, really. And I know that they can interpret and handle themselves very well, but I cannot make the same assumptions all the way across the membership of a climbing gym in the commercial context.
So what's more fulfilling for you, setting in a commercial environment or setting competition boulders?
I mean, technically, really, right now, my answer is really leaning towards training environments. I'm really, really interested in separating the difference between the competition environment in a really specific terms and the training environment. I think in the third, if all three of those things exist, a competition environment, a training environment, commercial, I can find a lot of enjoyable things in each one. But my interests are really driving me. I think interest and opportunities actually are really driving me right now into training areas, training zones. I have a lot of really meaningful contact with athletes, and that motivates me to change a lot. Competitions I really love. I love because I think that I translate a lot of my experience competing with that. The stress is massive, and from massive stress for me comes a lot of good work. But I've had in the commercial context, I've worked in a lot of fairly stressful places. In really good ways, in terms of like a really nice constraints that produced really great work as well. So, if I was to give one answer, it is the training environment currently. But I like to switch it up as well. I know myself enough that in 5 minutes, my idea will change a little bit, and I'll be able to move in a new direction.
Were you able to translate any of your experiences from the competition, from taking part in competitions to your commercial setting?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think that one is the use of volumes. I started setting in gyms in the early 2000s, and yeah, there really were introducing volumes allowed a lot of really interesting things. Just from the material aspect, variety is really cool and nice to have. But there are a lot of things about decision making that volumes introduce that are really useful and really helpful and fun for commercial setting. So I think that I really do want to take a lot of the commercial or the competition experience and drive it in the direction of commercial climbing gyms, and that those environments. Whether I do it or not, I think it's also happening. Instagram is a great Instagram is a great example, that of how competitions really directly have influenced setting in gyms and continues to do it, in a way that people like or hate, but also can inspire a lot of people. The Olympics has been a fun question or thing to talk about, in terms of influencing more people to climb, and I think that's that's the most direct line that I can draw from that idea that the competitions really are affecting directly what happens in commercial setting.
Could also be like a false friend, a false image.
Yeah.
Because you feel like either you are intimidated what's happening. Okay, they're jumping around, they're slipping off volumes and slipping off a wall, and they even cannot climb boulder number 3. So what's happening there? I don't want to try climbing or bouldering. Or on the other hand, they're like, oh, that's so dope. Like, it's way better than Ninja Roller. I want to climb and I want to run, and that's so cool. I want to be strong and powerful. Then you go into a gym and you cannot do any of it because either it doesn't exist or it's just too difficult.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's right. There's one of the gyms in town actually just started a small program that was called Intro to the Olympics.
Interesting.
And I thought that's incredible. It's incredible that it would happen, but I also had that realization that nothing that we saw at the Olympics is going to be possible at an Intro to the Olympics
No.
class. Even if we enter the gym and look, it doesn't look anything like, aside from maybe the speed wall.
Yeah.
Nothing looks like the Olympics at all. So you're right. I think that there will be all kinds of reactions to that idea, and in both directions, in all directions, really. And that's one of the concerns I think with a commercial climbing gym that I don't have to take into account, is that in a competition, people are ready for a very specific type of experience. But in the climbing gym, there are people who go to climbing gyms and they don't even want to climb. Their friend made them, or their grandson made them, or there's so many people that it's nice if we can consider them in some way. And in a competition, and especially in a training environment, I don't have to consider the users, the range of the users at all the same way.
That's true. I think we already into the topic. I really have problems talking about difficulty. How do you talk about difficulties for commercial setting, and how do you talk about difficulties for comstyle setting? People ask me, how difficult was it 7C, 7B plus? I don't know. Like last time I climbed that hard, or almost tried to climb that hard, I don't know. So how do you want to, how different, do you communicate about those in commercial and...
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think one really nice way, that I've tried to communicate that idea has to relate to circuits, um, and um, and time. I think it's true. Maybe attempts is actually another really great frame that we can start to do that a little bit. It is a really complicated thing. I luckily I also don't have to explain it very often. But in a commercial context, I think it is hard to do. It's very hard to do because people have the least experience talking about all the touch points or the positions that we usually give them, grade, all kinds of things, even a range of grade that is a circuit. We have to explain all of those ideas out, and they they aren't really satisfying actually in a lot of these conversations. People want like very often a fixed point that they understand and they feel. But a lot of the climbing I'm making, they're not. They gray those things out a lot. I intentionally want to gray those out. I want them to try things that they are not comfortable with, and the emotional reaction changes how they feel about difficulty. You know, at the commercial side, I think that's true. Um, but it also happens in the competition context. You know, the World Cups that were in Salt Lake um, just a few months ago. I talked to a lot of the athletes, and they truly describe the rounds in ways that are really similar to, you know, the people in a gym. They're like the first the qualification was easy, they said, you know, and I thought, wow, that's incredible, because if I watch the results, easy is not the descriptor that I would give to, you know, most of the performances. So I think that, you know, on both ends, we do. It's nice if we can go further than just say a particular type of difficulty, and then the effective time on that frame. You know, 5 minutes makes things really, really difficult, or 4 minutes makes all of the problems of interpretation very difficult. So I can have a very difficult time and still think it was easy. If I, you know, answer with a physical parameter, it was not so difficult, you know, but because it was in 4 minutes, it really makes it hard to interpret and then climb. And then in gym context, is 6 weeks, you know, or 5 weeks, or however this long this boulder problem will last, that frame of time also makes it really hard for a lot of people to frame difficulty. They want to frame it in an hour. The session that they did today, it felt very too hard. You know, the reference they want to take also is with their favorite one that they tried last week.
Yeah.
And I think those things confound the information that they receive, and then how they tell it to me quite a bit. I love difficulty for sure, and that's one of the things that draws me to setting in a lot of contexts. But one of the things that I think is really interesting about difficulty is that we very often don't know how to deal with it or communicate what's happening in it.
Educated guessing. Yeah.
yeah. It's yeah. You know,
Yeah.
it's
But looking around, or like when you set commercial, you can always look around and be like, okay, I set this one last week and this one last week, and we can try this one just to compare. That's the thing, how it works a lot in Germany with guest setters. Have a climb over there, or just take a look at this. This is how our circuits work. This is our level, approximately. Yada yada. But when you come into a training facility, onto a wall, and it's blank, and you don't know the other setters, and they're like, "Hey, I'm Ayo. Hey, I'm Niki. What do we do now? Like, how do you tell me to set a difficult boulder problem? Which is, how do we do that?"
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you're right. One thing for sure is that it's really difficult to do that. For sure. If you do have some idea of how the climbers are working, usually, or even an idea, picture of the styles that they typically or stereotypically climb on, then I think for me it becomes a little bit easier um, to take them in a different direction, and that defines difficulty for them. You know, in your discussion with Josh and Mike Bikino, um, Josh said something about my approach. I listened to that and I thought, oh, what is my approach? I hadn't thought of it in that context. And I think that has a lot to do with how I usually approach setting in those scenarios. Is okay, what are you used to? But we'll sort of tilt that in a direction to what I think that will help you interpret what I think is happening in competitions, And I think that usually feels hard. It usually feels bad for a lot of climbers to be out of what they expect. And then the other thing I usually try to do a lot is I my process is very reductive. I want to take a boulder and then I want to remove everything that I possibly can from it, so that we are left with something that is very hard to interpret, and then I think as a result really requires a really high investment from the athlete on how it works. In words, that's usually what I want to do, and that's how I deal with difficulty. I think people are used to having a place to put their foot, having a place to put their hand, uh, having something to read. And the more I can remove those things, the more pressure I can put on them, figure something out that's weird. And that's usually where I approach difficulty in the training environment.
Example, sort of like now the training facility. If you probably you knew them before, right? Like the athletes, but you start like judging the difficulties of the boulders you have to set, or you're setting as a team. Do you try it with your strength, just to have like a good judgment about the difficulty and about their strengths as well? Or?
I mean, well, coming to Salt Lake was cool because there are so many athletes who are very, very good here. I haven't been in any place for very long like this where, where basically if I take 20 athletes, all 17 or 18 of them have climbed V13 or climbed, V15, between V10 and V13 or 15 every day. So I think that that finding different ways to place difficulty on the wall is really helpful, and I think that because of the tradition of climbing around this area and what happens in the gyms where they're also training quite a bit, I can add something to the training center that is just different. It is very different, and that I think is really helpful for them, but also for me. I don't have to climb the 15, to give them a challenge, and I think that's kind of nice. But also another thing is that in the boulders that we offer them, we have to, and I really like the idea of taking all of the climbers into consideration and making something that will, a round or a few rounds that will challenge all of them in sort of nice ways. So you're right. Some of it is about physical acuity. Is like, how strong am I? How strong are they? I understand that difference in this very concrete sense, but also what's the type of climbing and the type of feeling that really tweaks their emotional experience of moving through a round, and how much should I add in our training rounds so that it can be helpful for them, on a weekly basis.
Good. To round things up, what did you learn the most from commercial setting as a setter, and what did you learn the most from competition setting?
I think that's a good question. Probably a difficult question. I really do think that there is a lot of value in trying to combine or find some analogies that are useful in both scenarios. If I zoom out quite a bit and look at those things, I think that experimentation might be a really high value for me to expose both groups to.
Yeah, I was just waiting, like, what is he going to say? Commercial or competition?
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's a really useful thing for me to connect those things. My brain wants to do that all the time, anyways. Uh, I'm indecisive in that way, and I can avoid the question actually also with the answer. Yeah, I think that the value of experimentation is in its connection to like change, or what we might usually call something like growth, um, for me is quite high. And if I can introduce a lot of that into whatever context I'm working, then I'm usually having fun. And I usually also am having a really hard time um, interpreting, or have a lot of information to sort of sort through.
Mhm.
And that's fun for me.
What did I ask?
Yeah.
What was your learning experience from commercial
Right.
setting
Yeah,
and
that's
competition
right.
setting?
Yeah.
So no easy answer possible, right?
No easy answer, but something about the importance of experimenting. Yeah.
The problem for me is I'm just coming up with those questions because we're talking, and
Yeah.
and I'm always like, I should write that down and think about what I think about this. What would I say?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I'll
mean,
do
that's
that next time.
yeah. One of the fun things I think about the course, and that the internet provides us, is that we have a really long scope of time for evaluation now. Like I can go back to a competition in 2011, to a single boulder, and to look at what I think about what happened then in a new frame now. And I think that's one thing that I want to do a lot in the course that's really underused by me anyways. And I imagine it's also underused by a lot of people. The frame that we can use doesn't have to be the period of time that the boulder is up. Uh, and I think that we can draw some hopefully interesting ideas from doing that.
From a commercial point of view, I tried something similar, like a good working boulder.
Yeah.
Took pictures, like with the
Mhm.
competition boulder, stripped it, and reset it again after 2 or 3 sets, like same boulder, same difficulty, same spot. People, yeah, people loved it. But maybe they only loved it because I kind of like, yeah, maybe educated my customers
Yeah.
to climb and enjoy the climbs I offered them. And
Yeah.
then they were like, oh, that's a classic. But it also gave them the opportunity to see how much they grew performance-wise.
Yeah.
I really would say performance-wise, even though it's a commercial set. But would be really interesting to see that this happening in a comp. It's like, be that bold. Oh
Yeah.
man, there's so much stuff you could do for a comp. Like I've never seen like, or I never got it through. I think no one took me for serious, but I always wanted to do like a qualification round for the male group on a vertical wall and slip on. Nothing steep, nothing powerful, nothing whether like don't enter your comfort zone here. It's just climbing, okay? It's
Right.
stupid, funky climbing, but it's not overhanging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so much possible if you want to do.
Yeah. I think that it's true. There are a lot of possibilities, and people are taking things in in really interesting places. Um, and I think that's kind of where we are, if you ask me, but also where there's a lot of nice potential to do cool, cool things, cool work, uh, in both, in all of the contexts that are sort of available, whether it's commercial or competition, or this training segment, and that type of
Uh,
thing.
so you're pointing into the future. Yeah, that's another topic. That's another time. That's another time.
Yeah, for sure. Another couple of hours.
um, anything you would like to add about commercial setting, competition setting?
Whoa. I mean, off the top of my head, probably nothing. Nothing to add. Um, we went through like a few fun segments of it, and I doubt that will end any of the topics in our conversation.
Ayo,
Say hello again.
thank you. Hello, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us about the different kinds of setting approaches, commercial comp, and I think we found no clear answer, but we had a good time. So um, I will keep everyone updated out there about your root setting course. It's called Loops. I will add the description to the Instagram channel down here somewhere on YouTube. And for now, I just say thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks a lot.